Good afternoon, everybody. It's Monday, November the 15th, and today we have lecture number 6 for Philosophy 60, a course offered at LIU Brooklyn in the philosophy department for the fall 2021 semester. Today I'm going to be introducing the Prince of Machiavelli that was composed in 1513 and finalized then, but not published until 1516, which ironically was the same year that Sir Thomas More's Utopia was published, 1516, which is something that would be a great paper and a great analysis of the utopic speculations of More in England and Machiavelli's rather realpolitik approach to the notion of power and power over and increasing power in Italy, and something that book has remained active in terms of the reading by everybody from CEOs to generals to military personnel, academic scholars, as well as multiple students across the world. So this is a very, very important text, a classic in terms of political philosophy, which term I do not especially like, but it certainly is a very original and significant contribution to the history of political thinking, and was very innovative that it broke with morality as being a part of politics. He collapsed both into one, and this is something we will be discussing in class about Niccolo Machiavelli. Machiavelli himself operated out of France. Out of Florence, Italy, not out of France, excuse me. I'm thinking of many very crucial interpretations of Machiavelli that came from France afterwards and up until the French Revolution, and certainly in the post-1968 period as well. Anyway, to go back to the Florentine moment, Machiavelli was very, very concerned with the unity of Italy as a city-state, but at the same time, as has been mentioned in the class, Machiavelli's real intention is to win back his influence and reputation as being an advisor to the de' Medici family, to the Florentine power structure. And he writes this with that intention in mind. The text itself, in my view, is divided into three central parts. The first, of course, is his beautiful letter to Lorenzo, the Magnificent, that he writes about the gifting of this work of political thought. And this is very significant. We'll return to it in a second. Insofar as it sets basically the stage for the dual movement and the dual perspective of the text, still something that has confused even our modern thinkers, and how the double reading is always already necessary in engaging Machiavelli's Prince. Secondly, the historical books. I want to divide that into books 1 through 14. That's the first part of the text, in terms of its content, substantive, where the lessons, historical lessons, are being given to Lorenzo and to the readership. And this includes, of course, the early division of principalities into hereditary, mixed, and new principalities. Very crucial moment, and it also introduces the two central concepts that play throughout the book. Virtu, virtu, very different than Aristotelian virtue or excellence in some ways, and certainly the ancient view, and certainly the Christian virtue. This is a very interesting concept that we see in section 6, or chapter 6, if you will, how new principalities are acquired with one's own arms and energy, or virtue, right? Using one's skills, one's virtuosity to acquire a state or a principality. And then secondly, fortuna is the other concept, something by chance. And We will look at this in terms of a later chapter, chapter 25, more in detail. And of course, the famous reference to Fortuna being like a woman. Um, Also, in the historical chapters, he'll talk about clemency and cruelty a bit, and this is relevant for our purposes. Chapter 8 at the end, in terms of whether it's better to, be cruel, execute enemies, if you will, all at once, or in piecemeal fashion. Obviously, he comes down on the side of the former in the advice. So we see that. We also see how to rule in colonies and administer the colonies through this, and also the lack of trust one should show mercenaries. So what Machiavelli is doing in these historical books is both pointing out from the great lessons of history, and you will see in the first 14 books many references to everybody from Scipio to Alexander the Great to the founding of new states such as Romulus and, of course, even Moses, even though he has questions about Moses, to that of giving advice about how one's army should be constituted, how one should rule through violence. This is also engaged. And also finally, a notion of how to use troops, how to use different types of troops, and how do you measure one's strength when in power. So this is the first 14, again, books of the 1 through 14 books of the Prince. The second set of books, 15 through 25, are concerned with practical matters. And this begins with the central problem of the Prince, or the central problematic, which is to be found in chapter 15, in which Machiavelli states very clearly, right? Very, very clearly, right? That there is nothing that wears out more faster than generosity. Even as you practice it, you lose the means of practicing it, and you become either poor and contemptible, or in the case of escaping poverty, rapacious and hateful. The thing above all against which a prince must protect himself is being contemptible and hateful. Generosity leads to both. Though it is much wiser to be put up with a reputation of being a miser, which brings shame without hate, than to be forced, just because you want to appear generous, into a reputation for rapacity, which alone brings shame on you and hate along with it. This is very important to remember in terms of spending and what one promises, and we can read this in terms of today's Biden administration. But I do want to back up to what, again, I know I mentioned that is one of the central problems of the book. The really central problematic is found in chapter 15, on the reasons why men are praised or blamed, especially the princes. So this is a very, very crucial ending to chapter 15, and this is the really central problem of the prince, right? I know everyone will agree that among these many qualities, a prince certainly ought to have all those that are considered good. But since it is impossible to have and exercise them all, and because the conditions of human life simply do not allow it, a prince must be shrewd enough to avoid the public disgrace of those vices that would lose him his state. If he possibly can, he should also guard against vices that will not lose him his state, but if he cannot prevent them, he should not be too worried about indulging them. And furthermore, he should not be too worried about incurring blame for any vice without which he would find it hard to save its state. For if you look at matters carefully, and this is crucial, you will see that something resembling virtue, if you follow it, may be your ruin, while something else resembling vice will lead, if you follow it, to your security and your well-being. This is a central problem. Should the prince embrace the bad, embrace the viceful, versus that of the virtue, in order to keep his power and to increase it? And does it matter to him? And this is crucial again. Does it become a necessary condition for his power to control through any means necessary, that power. And Machiavelli is arguing for that. We will speak to this in the class. Again, I think the crucial problem here is bad is good as bad. You'll find out when you stay, in power, or you're in power and you want to retain it. Again, going back to the title of this book, The Prince, I would like to retitle it again, Power, How One Obtains It, How One Maintains It, and finally, how does one increase it? This is a crucial matter of the entire book, right? These three questions throughout. It is a treatise on power. Okay, going back again to one other section, and we will be discussing the two more sections. One being chapter 17, is it better to rule by fear or by love? And he gives very good arguments. I'm not going to go through those here because I'd like that to be a discussion in class. However, you will find this in chapter 17, right? And I'll read you one section of it. This is page 46 in the edition we're using. The third full paragraph, of the chapter 17. A prince who prefers not to rob his subjects, who wants to be able to defend himself, who wants to avoid poverty and contempt, and who doesn't want to be a plunderer, should not mind in the least if people consider him, again, a miser. This is going to be very, very important going forward. And then a prince, and this is page 48, right, in the third paragraph, a prince should not make himself feared in such a way that even if he gets no love, he gets no hate either, because it is perfectly possible to be feared and not be hated. And this will be the result if only the prince will keep his hands off the property of his subjects or citizens and off their women. We will be discussing this about the question of ruling by fear or by love later in the class sessions. Okay, finally, chapter 25, another crucial chapter, the influence of luck in human affairs and the ways to counter it. And this is the crucial and very, very problematic and controversial and, provocative and controversial together passage of Machiavelli. The last paragraph of chapter 25. I conclude that so long as fortune varies and men stand still, they will not prosper when they suit the times and fail when they do not. But I do feel this, that it is better to be rash or bold than timid, for fortune is a woman, and the man that wants to hold her down must beat and bully her. We see that she yields more often to men of this stripe than those who could not come coldly towards her. Like a woman, too, Fortuna is always a friend of the young because they are less timid, more brutal, and take charge of her more recklessly. There's a very good footnote on this about the ninth story of Boccaccio, and we will discuss this because I think there's been a lot of misinterpretation. Is Machiavelli advocating a kind of misogynist position here vis-a-vis power? So we're going to go back to that, and this ninth story and what he might be trying to grow out of this allegory. Okay, so one other thing before I close on Machiavelli today. This is short. It's an introduction. I'll do more in the next video on him after we get into some of the readings. Is about the first letter, the letter that opens this book. As I mentioned, it is like an application for a job interview. Or a job. It's a kind of cover letter, and an outreach, if you will. An olive branch coming to the prince, and also operating at a level that Machiavelli is trying to say, I am worth it. So he promises that both his historical knowledge and his knowledge of contemporary affairs gives him a great advantage, and that no greater gift could be given to the prince. But the crucial part of this is the dual perspective, and I read that as well to emphasize. I hope it will not be thought presumptuous of a man of such low social rank who will undertake to discuss the rule of princes and lay down principles for them. When painters want to represent landscapes, they stand on low ground to get a true view of the mountains and the hills. They climb to the top of the mountain, on the other hand, to get a panorama over the valleys. So similarly, to know the prince well, to know the people well, one must be a prince, looking down from the mountain, if you will, this kind of kaleidoscopic panoramic view of what the people are doing, the watchtower, if you will. Okay. On the other hand, though, to know the prince as well, one must be oneself of the people. And this is a crucial moment in Machiavelli. This is a manifesto, if you will, for the people in many ways. And we'll speak about this vis-a-vis Marx later in the semester. Machiavelli is claiming that one must know the people, be of the people in order to rule well. One cannot be above the people. There's no such thing as a top down, and this does not happen. So this is what he's really advocating for, is this double reading throughout. So what he leaves us with, and I'll end here. He leaves us with a book that is a bequeathing of strategy of how to understand power, how to transform it in some ways from being of the people and from the people's perspective. Very, very important. At the same time, he is showing how power rules, how power operates, and what's being advised to power. So you have this very brilliant book that has this double edge to it, a double-edged sword, if you will, that's cutting into the power structure in some ways, both advising but also cutting into it by giving the people a much greater understanding of the historical means of how the princes got there, but at the same time, how the people in power operate, including listening to their advisors, including how they would build their reputation, including how they administer colonies. All of these matters are very, very important to keep in mind throughout, right? How princes, operate at many levels, avoiding flattery, how one chooses one's counselors, how one, not only acquires but maintains reputation, and etc. And how you avoid contempt and hatred, very important part. We'll talk more about that in terms of poverty, and of course, class struggle. So thank you. This is, again, to serve as an introduction to Niccolo Machiavelli. In my judgment, certainly one of the greatest figures to grace the planet in the history of the systems of political thinking and political thought, and also philosophical thought. I mean, the concepts of virtue and fortuna are very, very, very important in terms of our contemporary situation, as well as what we'll see vis-a-vis transformation. Notion of fortuna as contingency, chance. At some levels, a kind of spontaneity with chance, and also the ability to take advantage of that chance that presents itself, or the contingencies that emerge. So I wish everybody well, and we'll see you in class, and there'll be another one continued soon, a follow-up on Machiavelli, and then a movement to the work of Rene Descartes. Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye.